Prior to the creation of the Fernery as we know it today, there had been other outdoor ferneries established in the park. The first of these was created in 1908 on Manhattan Island, at the southern end of the main lake. This was planted by Walter Smith, soon after commencing duties as park curator. A proposal for a new fernery was put forward at the beginning of 1918, because plant theft at Manhattan Island had been an issue. Board member Charles Bellringer urged the board to adopt a policy for establishing a fernery that would be second to none in the country. He also suggested that the curator's time, given his botanical talents and knowledge, was being wasted on mundane duties and that his skills should be put to better use. Bellringer suggested the area in the gully below the People's Stand at the racecourse. This is what is now called Stainton Dell. Bellringer felt this was the most picturesque and ideal spot. Walter Smith reported in October 1918 that preparations for the new fernery were complete, and planting would take place as soon as the ferns were received. Smith resigned in 1920, which probably stalled the fernery project. However, in June 1922, it was reported that preliminary work for shaping and grading land for a fernery had begun. The location was on the banks of Stainton Dell below the racecourse walk, where an area was fenced off and planted. The work was carried out by John Gibson, a prominent horticulturist of Franklin Road. In November 1923, a fernery committee consisting of Charles Bellringer, James MacLeod, and William Besley were appointed to make arrangements for the establishment of a first-class fernery. At the board meeting of May 1924, the Pukekura Park Board instructed the Fernery Committee to submit plans for a fernery costing approximately £500, to be considered by the board at its next meeting. The project became financially possible after a very successful Queen Carnival, that netted the board over £1,400. At the following meeting in June, William Besley outlined a plan to excavate 3 chambers, one running east-west, and 2 running north-south to the north of the first. The walls separating these chambers would be 8 feet thick, in order to support the glass roofs. The dimensions of the chambers, taken from the roof level, would be 30 feet by 50 feet for the front one, and 60 feet by 30 feet for the 2 rear ones. The back chambers were designed to be 10 foot higher than the front one. Terracing of many of the walls was proposed, meaning the area at the bottom of the chambers would be considerably less than that at the top, and the terraces would be planted with the many varieties of ferns. At the same meeting of the board, the chairman Hector Dempsey thanked Mr. Besley for his trouble and stated that a great deal of work had been done by Mrs. Lovell of Howera, to whom the board were deeply indebted. Work on clearing the site started immediately. After many years in the planning, construction of the Lovell-designed fernery started in June 1926. The following 3 sketches attempt to show how the fernery was constructed. The first sketch shows a cross-section through the valley. A natural valley with a swamp at the bottom. Both Horton Walk and the Racecourse Walk already existed. These were among the earliest paths in the park to be developed. The next sketch shows areas of the hillside to be leveled, to prepare for the chambers to be excavated. Earth was removed from the side of the hill above where the houses were to be created, forming a stepped plateau, roughly 180 feet by 90 feet. The topsoil from this excavation was put to one side, and later used to top-dress the reclaimed swamp. The subsoil was put directly into the swamp, which was raised by as much as 12 feet. The third sketch shows how the houses relate to each other. Raising House 1 above the entrance, and the raising houses 2 and 3 above House 1 was clever as this minimized the amount of earth that had to be removed. Even so, approximately 4,000 cubic yards of subsoil was transferred during the construction, all dug manually with spades. Horton decided to form a lakelet with 3 small islands in it. The dam for this was formed using some of the excavated subsoil, which was transferred from the fernery entrance by a truck running on rails. The person in charge of constructing the fernery was Mr. Holmes, of Putaruru. 6 laborers were employed, 4, dedicated to excavation of the soil, one leveling the swamp, and one in charge of the truck. Thomas Horton was the overall supervisor of the project, which took about 5 months to complete, sometimes under very trying conditions. The swamp was filled, grass sown and flowers planted, before the fernery was open, as can be seen on the screen, from these photos published in the Herald on the 31st of December 1927. By October the superintendent reported that the excavation of the fernery chambers had been completed as far as it was advisable. The final excavation was done following the carpentry work and glazing. Unfortunately, a delay in the delivery of the glass for the roofs meant that they were not completed until mid-1927. While construction was ongoing, many people went out collecting ferns. The Fernery Committee visited Taranaki forest properties. Messrs. Maxwell and Davies collected ferns on a trip to King Country, Rotorua, Bay of Plenty and Auckland. Many friends of the park from around the country also sent ferns. The last aspect of construction was cutting the steps in the tunnels. The fernery was officially opened at 1:30 p.m. on January 28, 1928. The mayor, Victor Griffiths, did the honors. The scheme had cost approximately £1,150. This photo was published in the Taranaki Herald's December 1928 Christmas special issue, showing the completed fernery. This view taken inside the fernery shows punga roof supports that rest on the paths. This wasn't part of the original design. It was a cost-cutting measure to avoid spending money on more substantial roof beams. Some members of the committee were not happy with this solution. This photo was published in the Herald on October 18, 1929. It shows a new propagating house that was built near the entrance of the fernery, paid for by donations. In 1938, a begonia house was constructed using materials salvaged from one of the old glass houses that were part of the Brooklands estate. A new tunnel was excavated connecting it to House 3. The following year another glass house was moved from Brooklands to the fernery site, to make a propagating house. The first female staff to work in the park were the Lawson sisters, Evelyn and Nolene. They worked in the fernery during the Second World War. In the mid-1960s, Fred Parker donated a large collection of Cymbidium orchids. A glass house was built to store them, and House 2 of the fernery was converted to display them. A proviso of giving the orchids was that the park had to employ a suitably qualified person to look after them. Fortunately, George Fuller, an orchid expert, was returning to New Zealand and looking for work. The old begonia house was replaced in 1967 by the Kibbe begonia house, which was a new steel structure funded by George Kibbe. It was officially opened on the 28th of January 1970. Kibbe had donated $20,000 for the project. In 1998, the roofs over houses 2 and 3 were raised and amalgamated into one structure. An extension to the north created a viewing platform overlooking houses 2 and 3. A new entrance was also added to the Kibbe house. These photos show houses 2 and 3 pre-1998. The Kibbe house was extended in 2001 and an entrance from Horton Walk was added in 2006, giving wheelchair access to the fernery. Still housing an extensive collection of native ferns, the fernery and display houses now display in excess of 50,000 plants, highlighting the everyday to the exotic, in ever-changing, amazing displays.